We're going to tackle the question of what is anthropology? That's the question that we've been reading about in the first 15 pages, the first half of the first chapter that you read in Through the Lens of Anthropology. And I'll be drawing from that, sort of put our own spin on this, divided into 5 themes or 5 ideas for the class. This is the outline of what we'll be talking about as we go through the class. So these headings will come up again. As I said, the PowerPoint, and if technology doesn't fail, a recording will be posted sometime after class. So if there ever is a slide that there are too many words, which sometimes professors tend to do, I try not to, but sometimes it happens, don't worry. You can always go back and look again. And your goal, of course, is not to copy down every word. It might be to copy down something that somebody says during class that spurs your conceptual imagination during that time. But this is what we'll be trying to go through about the ideas of what is anthropology: study of humans, the importance of learned behavior or culture, that it is a 4 fields discipline or makes connections between human actions, and then a couple extensions on that, which is how it should ideally include everyone, and that it should ideally help us produce knowledge about human problems, things that are messing up our lives. All right, so as you may notice from the very beginning of this book, and you may not have had much of an idea of what anthropology is, every so often I do go around before class and say if anybody knows anything about anthropology, and get some funny answers. But as our textbook says, anthropology, the one constant when we look across the various definitions, is that it involves the study of humans, the study of humans. You can kind of see that in the root word here, anthro, which is given to us from a Greek root, meaning man in the old days, humans, people in the new days. So people, humans, and that ology root, which you may see in other disciplines like biology and sociology, basically just means the study of. So there you go, right in the name, the study of humans, or as Muckle, Gonzalez, and Camp put it, involves the study of humans. Now, for this edition of the textbook, I've taught out of the first 2 editions, and it was just Muckle and Gonzalez. So every so often I might mess up and not include the author they've included on this 3rd edition. I'll try to be inclusive, but sometimes I might lapse into old habits. So this is a new textbook for me too, with the added in another archaeologist. So by the way, this is the official way, if you're in those classes where professors are kind of sticklers for citing things, and especially if you use a system of what we call parenthetical citation, things that are in parentheses that point you to the reference, then the official way to do this is to include the author names, the year of publication, and the page number, kind of like that. That's a lot. And so for my purposes, what I'm going to do, and you can do this too, just know in the back of your head that that's the official long version of this. We're going to use a slightly abbreviated, because we all know we're using the same textbook, just going to abbreviate it as MGC for Muckle, Gonzalez, and Camp. So Now you may not want to do this out there in some other part of the world. Also, if you can just reduce it to the page number, you don't even need that MGC in there because, again, as long as we're citing from the same source, the textbook, for me, the most important thing is that page number because it directs us to where we want to be and so that we're all on the same page. So we'll work on that over time. A framework. So what Muckle, Gonzalez, and Camp tell us is that anthropology, there's a lot of disciplines that study what humans do. You may have had some sociology classes or economics classes or political science classes, religious studies, philosophy. All of those things involve the study of humans and what humans are doing. The way that anthropology is distinguished is that it brings its own framework. All of those disciplines also bring their own framework. So this is what our authors tell us here is that anthropology gives a framework, a way of understanding how humans came and continue to be. So a lot of stuff into human origins, what kind of probably going back further into the past than many other disciplines, but also in some ways, as we'll see, probably broader than many disciplines tackle human beings. One of the things that is perhaps I most like about anthropology, but maybe most frustrating about it as well, is that almost everything in anthropology is up for debate or up for question. And so when we say the study of humans, and we look at page 6 in your text, all of a sudden we confront the problem or the question that the agreement is not necessarily agreed on what humans need, that there are debates about where exactly we should draw the line between human beings. I'm suddenly realizing that I've used the wrong page number there. I'm actually on page 8. Let's see if I can change that before things get too weird. There we go. Aha. All right. So some anthropologists start off by saying humans include creatures in the family. Oh, this is those big Latin words that we'll soon be using when we talk about human evolution, homininae. Basically, creatures that became habitually bipedal, started to walk on 2 feet. We'll be talking a lot more about them soon, don't worry. So some people would say, well, that's the beginning of when we start calling creatures human and including them in the human family. Other anthropologists say, that's a little bit extreme. Maybe we should start calling creatures human when they are part of the genus Homo, such as you might have heard of Homo erectus, for example. Starting from about 2 million years ago, when you have not only bipedalism, but a lot of evidence of tool use, some of behaviors that seem more in line with what we might consider humans today. So some people go back about 2 million years to the genus Homo. And some people say, well, that's maybe too large here. When we say humans, we really should talk about the species Homo sapiens, which includes us and creatures back to about 200 to 300,000 years ago. And in this case, we're dealing not only with creatures that are habitually bipedal and can use tools, but are doing things like probably good evidence for language, for various forms of art, music, dance, hunting, gathering, cooking, things that, you know, we consider to be really part of our own universals as Homo sapiens. So some people want to go back to 7 million years ago. Yeah, as long as we're going to be talking about human evolution pretty soon, these are abbreviations for time distance, MYA, millions of years ago, and YA, just years ago, if we don't have a millions in there. But you can see here that there's already some debate about, well, where are we going to draw the line, and how, where does the study of humans actually start if we're talking about the study of humans? There is something that we can agree on, though, as anthropologists. Oftentimes, anthropologists are more agree upon what we disagree with than what we agree with, if that makes sense. In the sense that we reject definitions of human which are very specific and in some ways arrogant. So one of the things that we are more inclusive than is the idea that humans only came to be about 30,000 years ago, when you see some of those cave paintings and stuff emerge in Europe. And so people who want to say that, you know, humans are only in this part of the world, that's a very short-sighted view of human beings, and we want to be much more inclusive than that. Some people have tried to limit humans to humans who farm, who do agriculture. And they would consider those humans that are hunting and gathering for subsistence to be outside the boundaries of human existence. So in the old days, they were called wild man or savages, and people would wonder if they were truly human. Again, this is a definition that anthropologists reject. And of course, we also reject the arrogant definition that humans are only what we are today, or only our group is part of the human family and other people are lesser, different than human. So again, we at least, the very baseline for humanity that anthropologists consider are Homo sapiens, members of the same species. We reject these arrogant and frankly racist definitions of what humans should be. They've caused a lot of harm in our history, people doing harm to each other because they reject their humanity. So, anthropology, study of humans. Second big point, perhaps the biggest insight that anthropology has given to the world is the idea of learned behavior, also known as culture. The idea that the things that we do and the ways humans are different are primarily from the ways we learn to be human. And this happens from a very early age. It happens from born, and we're introduced to people. We can't even talk, and we're shown who our relatives are and how to behave to them. I've brought up here one of the key persons who put this idea out into the world, Ruth Benedict, in 1934, the book Patterns of Culture. You read very close to the bottom, it says, has a preface by Margaret Mead, one of the most famous US anthropologists. This book was a huge bestseller, and it kind of, in some ways, took this word culture from being a word that people didn't use that much, that wasn't very well defined, to make it into a word that you've probably heard lots in your life today. And if you've heard this term lots in your life, you can thank or blame anthropologists for putting it out there. So anthropology insists that culture is the primary reason for human differences. We're not trying to deny that people have instincts, that there are things that everybody does, like eat. So there must be something natural about eating. But if you think about those things that we all do, like eating, that's also something that we very particularly learn how to do. We learn that certain foods are edible and other foods disgust us, even though in other societies they may be perfectly edible. So termites, wonderful source of protein, beautiful food. But if you weren't culturally taught to eat them, you might not be physically able to eat them. So we learn how to do this in our bodies. Now, I said I was going to pick on Ariana, so she's been warned. You had a great quote about culture. What drew you to that?
That's a very big impact on everyone's life. I feel like with the quote that you mentioned about the ideology and how that impacts your behavior and your thoughts and all, I find that to be very true. Seeing it in my own time.
All right, great. So, personal reflection, bringing in to see how these ideas, ideology, these ideas affect everybody's life, and our people are brought into this. I mentioned that those are some big words. They're too big for me. So I'm going to use some smaller words here, which is that culture is things people think, ideology, things people do, behavior, and things people have, which in Ariana's quote is the products of that thought and behavior. So the things that we make because of it, and that end up reinforcing those ideas. So I am imagining that in the cultural group that people belong to, there are certain objects or ways of expressing those ideas and dimensions. These are quite common. Might be blankets, might be scrolls, might be written text, things that people use to express those. So this is a definition that that anthropologists have a pretty wide definition of what culture is, things people think, do, and have, which includes our material culture as well. The crucial part of this, as I mentioned, is that culture is learned. We don't necessarily learn it in school. I mean, we do learn a lot in school, but it refers to learning in a broad sense. That whole person learning that you do from the first days of becoming a person. You're always learning things, and so this is the way in which we refer to culture as learned. And I want to bring up a key quote here, is that sometimes when we start to use the word culture, people think about groups as being locked into particular ways of life. And we'll be talking a lot more about this mid-course, middle of the semester. But I want to bring this up here just to highlight it, that all cultures are always changing, they're dynamic, and they're fluid. So people are always thinking about their culture, maybe modifying it, and maybe living in between 2, 3 different cultures, so that fluidity. So we don't want to just see culture as putting people into these boxes that never change. Again, we'll be talking about that a lot in the mid-course. So one of the questions is, if culture is so important to human beings, to humans, when does it start? Or when did it happen? Now here I've put up the 3 places at which anthropologists have kind of roughly drawn some lines around when we want to include as human beings. The bipedal creatures, Homo, the genus Homo 2 million years ago, or Homo sapiens. So the people who want to consider culture to be way back about 7 million years ago might talk about how, well, humans aren't born walking. We're actually born quite helpless and dependent, and we only learn how to walk as other people instruct us in how to walk. Now, we basically kind of learn to walk on our own, but if you look around the world, there's all sorts of ways in which people use various devices, scarves, and encourage children to walk in various ways. And some people even claim that there are different cultural walking styles. Some people may have been, like me, I was teased for my individual walking style, whatever that was. So obviously walking is not just one thing. It's not completely natural to us. Is it a learned behavior? Again, I put a question mark there because some people are like, nah, that's part more of biology and nature than it is of culture, which is fine. That's okay. But some people ask. The people who say culture happens back with the genus of Homo would point to the archaeological evidence that we can see in the archaeological record widespread stone tool use as of at least 2.5 million years ago, maybe 3 million years ago. So if you have stone tools, you have to be able to make those tools, transmit them, learn how to use whatever it is you're using. So a lot of people would probably put culture, the distinct evidence of culture, back about 2 to 3 million years ago. Certainly, as we talked about, with Homo sapiens, we see all kinds of things that we would call cultural, different hunting and gathering patterns, musical instruments, clothing, language, cooking, lots of cultural stuff there. So again, this is some debate about when exactly we become dependent upon learned behavior. I'm probably a person who wants to put it pretty deep, far back personally, but I can understand why people want to say it's clearer when we get to Homo sapiens about 300,000 years ago. So again, this is a matter of some debate. Again, though, we want to reject those ideas of culture which are very limited, that would restrict culture to only certain kinds of people. So again, we go back to the idea of modern humans at 30,000 years ago. People go into some cave in France and get all nutty about the cave paintings, and they should. Those were great. They were wonderful cave paintings. They still are beautiful stuff. But we can see evidence of art and cool forms of rock, and fortunately some of this stuff gets disappeared over time. We can't see it. The wonderful thing about a cave painting is it stays around for a while. But people were making art all over the world in places as far away as Australia, certainly all of Africa, South Africa. See some of the earliest examples of art. So people have been doing this for far beyond those famous cave paintings. Again, some people have wanted to limit culture to people who had domesticated plants and animals. And anthropologists would insist that it is actually our ideas about the world and our transmission of learned behavior which make it possible to do agriculture. And the people who hunt and gather are also fully cultural members of our species and have we would call religious beliefs and kinship and all kinds of fun cultural stuff. And of course, the idea that only we have culture and other people don't. Anthropologists insist that everybody has culture, that it is something that makes us human. So there are some people who belong to specific named cultural groups, but all of us learn how to be human in a particular and specific way. And you can't really be a full human being without being a part of the society, without learning the proper way to speak and be human.